Hello, I'm Joanna Friel, Chair of the Chislehurst Society. It's great to be here with you today. I've been asked to talk about Richmal Crompton, and I am uncertain about how many times people have said to me, "Who's he?" Well, the answer is, who's she? And she is the author of Just William, which is why I've called the talk The Woman Behind the Boy. The books, the Just William books, were really popular. It'll be interesting to see if it carries on into the next generation. But I've chosen to talk about Richmal Crompton because I think she is a really significant female role model. One hears so much about all the illustrious men of our Victorian past, but Richmal was a strident woman who achieved an awful lot, and she was disabled. I'll explain a little bit later. And as I'm disabled, I find her quite a powerful role model. So that's really where my interest in the woman came from. But who is she, and what is she all about? It's a strange name, isn't it, Richmal? But apparently, she was born in Bury in Lancashire, but apparently the name comes from a contraction of her maternal grandparents' names, who were Richard and Mary. And apparently, if you go up to Bury in Lancashire, you'll find a few other women called Richmal, but I'm not sure it's a name that'll carry on into the future. She was born in Bury, as I said, in 1890, and she's the daughter of a clergyman. And she lived her young life in Lancashire, went to a local school, did very well actually, and got a scholarship which took her to Royal Holloway to read classics. Don't know what it would have been like for a young woman to leave Lancashire and come down to London and be over at Royal Holloway, which is in Egham, and a bit out in the sticks. But when you think that she actually graduated, let me get my dates right, in 1914, that is such an incredibly poignant date, is it not? One wonders how it was for her finding her first work right in the midst of the Great War. She went back to Lancashire and she taught at a girls' school. But her sister, during that period of the Great War, became romantically involved with a publisher called Mr. Disher. I don't know if he was dishy, but let's hope he was. And she married him and moved to London. So Richmal was she was very close to her sister Clara, and she visited her. So it wasn't unusual for her to start thinking about her future away from Lancashire. And indeed, after the war, during the war, she started to work as a teacher here in Bromley, at Bromley High School for Girls. Now, that's not the school that you may know of in Blackbrook Lane. It's the same school, but that's not that building. Richmal started her teaching career at the original site of the school, which is in Elmstead Road in Bromley. I think the Bank of America is there now. She was a popular teacher and teaching classics to those young girls. She was obviously quite a character at that stage, because I found information about her actually being really involved with the suffragette movement. So I can imagine being taught in her classes by someone with passion, someone with a cause, most definitely. And she was a successful and well-loved teacher at the school. I don't know if it was the war that made her turn to writing. Perhaps she had some time on her hands during the long evenings. But certainly I think because she was a successful teacher, she was turning her hand to writing. But it was already in 1918 that her first work of fiction was published. And interestingly, the character that she had focused her story on was a young boy, mischievous lad, called Thomas. So William didn't first appear in that first story. He was to appear in a story called Rice Mould Pudding. I haven't read it, but you can probably imagine the sorts of things that a naughty little boy would have got up to. But that was published in Home magazine in 1919. William permanently appears in a publication called The Happy Mag, and from 1922 onwards, he was to be a regular. Richmal was obviously doing rather well, both from her teaching and her writing, because she was able to buy her own house, which for a woman in the 1915, during the wartime, was relatively unusual. And she bought this house in Cherry Orchard Road in Bromley. It's a charming house, and sadly, her father had recently died, so her mother actually came to live with her, came from Lancashire and came to live with her daughter here in Bromley. So you have a domestic scene, a teacher cycling to school every day in Bromley and working away at her writing and increasingly becoming more widely published and certainly successful. But I won't call it disaster, but great trauma occurred in 1923 when the family went on holiday to Cromer in Norfolk, and Richmal was struck down with polio. Today, we all take a sugar lump and we're all vaccinated against polio, and it's not the disaster that it was back then. But she was really badly affected. And remember I said she was disabled. She lost the use of her right leg completely. Surprisingly, she was able to walk in an ungainly fashion, but certainly with a stick, and would often be known to sit on the sidelines and just take very cautious steps. But this young girl who'd been cycling to school and standing up in front of the class could no longer do that. Exhaustion was just too much for her. So she retired from teaching, and William came into his own. He was the one who financed her lifestyle, shall we say. But where does William come from? So this is Richmal, a spinster, it's a horrible word, isn't it? Living with her mother, domestic scene in Bromley. Where's the inspiration for this naughty young boy and his outlaw friends who steals the late 1930s and 40s literary scene, shall we say? Well, remember I said that she was close to her sister Clara, who'd married Mr. Disher. Well, they had a boy. So her young nephew, Tommy Disher, was possibly the role model for just William. Tommy Disher went to school locally in Bromley, went to St Hugh's public school. He wore a cap and proper uniform, etc. So you can see him as the dislodged cap of just William. But he was interviewed in later life. He became a bank clerk, quite a solitary, silent sort of figure. And he cowed from any association with William. He really did not enjoy that at all. But I think we probably believe that Richmal got her inspiration from her young nephew. So as I say, she was becoming increasingly successful, and she was able to move to a much more substantial house, and that was, and still is to this day, there on Oakley Road. It was called the Glebe. And that house has a Bromley heritage plaque on it. So if you're keen to go for a walk, the Two Doves pub is next door. You can go and have a look at where Richmal Crompton moved to. I'm told that the builders, when doing some renovations on the house, actually found a brick which had the initials RC emblazoned upon them, sort of etched out in the stone, which is interesting because Richmal Crompton's name, her formal and real name is Richmal Crompton Lamburn. Lamburn was her formal surname. Crompton was actually her middle name, but it was obviously her pen name. Clearly proud of it, and etched it onto the stones of the house that she had built for her. She moved to that house in 1928, and then her mother passed away. So who moves in with her but her wonderful sister Gwen? Because, as I said, she was disabled and she wasn't finding life terribly easy, and she certainly needed people to look after. She had a housekeeper, but Clara was there to see to the everyday little things that were significant. There are lots of lovely pictures which I found through the News Shopper of Richmal, surrounded by her adoring young fans. signing autographs. And it's just charming to see a young woman being so successful. I found more recently a glorious picture of a shop on Royal Parade here in Chislehurst, no longer there. Royal Parade is still there, but the bookshop isn't there, Waters. And tucked down in the corner is a little book of Just William. So I was just pleased to see some Chislehurst heritage come to light in that factor. But as I said, I'm chairman of the Chislehurst Society, and it's the Chislehurst history that particularly appeals to me. So when I was trawling through eBay, as I so regularly do, I was delighted to find a letter from an adoring fan addressed to Miss Richmal Crompton at Beechworth, Chislehurst. So I thought, well, I know she lived on Oakley Road in Bromley, so I've now discovered she's moved. So of course I had to find out where that house was, and it is a charming, at that time, bungalow on Chislehurst Road, almost as you leave to come towards the Petswood Railway Bridge, tucked away on the common, hidden from view. So I imagine that this celebrated author rather enjoyed an element of privacy in the corners of Chislehurst. But I'm delighted to say that I also got the opportunity to go and visit that house, and the owners there have the deeds, and there on the deeds of the house is Richmal Crompton's signature, her autograph, if you will. It's lovely to find real provenance when it comes to history. It just proves so much. So I was really pleased to see that. And of course, then I got a whole tour of the house, which was absolutely lovely. But as I was leaving, I couldn't help notice that the nameplate of the house, Beechworth, was not looking at its best, and the current owners won't mind me saying so, because as I left and they knew what my position was in the Chislehurst Society, they just said, any chance of us having a society plaque dedicated to Richmal Crompton at the door? I was all for the scheme, and I think it was a really positive thing to do. What has come to light from other books that are written about Richmal, and they're all available in Bromley Library, are some charming pictures of Richmal in her later life in the Rose Garden at Beechworth, and a picture with her great nephew, Edward Albee, who I suppose could have been another example of Just William. And through the glories of LinkedIn, I managed to get hold of Edward Albee, and he told me so much more about his great aunt, and she really came alive to me as a character. And he told me that her archives were at Roehampton Institute. Not entirely certain what the connection is between Richmal and Roehampton, because that's not where she studied. But the Froebel Institute is based at Roehampton, and very much that institute is involved in looking at literacy and learning. So they have got Richmal's archives. Of course, I couldn't resist, and I had a wonderful day with the archivist in the Crompton Archives at Roehampton. I learned so much more then by going through the archive of old letters that had been written by Richmal and to Richmal, and you learned how loved she was. She got postcards and letters from all over the world from adoring fans, but also from her family, who were clearly always asking how she was, particularly wanting to know that she was doing well. She was thriving, but I think encouraged really by this real bloom of love that surrounded her. On the shelves at the archives are many of Richmal's first editions and her own publications. And I'm reminded that although she is a known author for Just William, she's written many other novels, and there are many novels that are nothing to do with Just William that she wrote between 1923 and 1960. And also on the bookshelf, I was really pleased to note that there was a book by Alan Watts. He's not a particularly famous name until I sort of tell his story, but he's a Chislehurst resident born in 1916 who moved to California and actually founded the Flower Power movement. The guy died surrounded by many women and several phials of cocaine, shall we say. But he was into the Buddhist practices, and I discovered from the archives that Richmal was interested in mysticism and ghost stories. Perhaps she was looking for inspiration for her other novels. But I was pleased to see that she had a copy of Alan Watts's writings called Behold the Spirit within her own collection. So did she admire another local resident? Did she admire the author? We don't know, but it was something that tuned in with me anyway, that I was absolutely delighted to learn more about. During the Second World War, while she was still living at the Glebe, she'd actually been coming over to Bullerswood House, which was the head of the Auxiliary Fire Service, and she got there. She was still able to drive with an adapted car, surprisingly, but she was answering the telephones for the Auxiliary Fire Service. So I know that she was community-minded, shall we say. This is what I'm saying about her defeating her disability. She found things that she could do. It's like myself, I can do things sitting down, and that's what she was able to do, to answer the telephone for the fire brigade service during the Second War. But coming over to Chislehurst, I was thrilled to sort of learn more about how she lived her life in later times. And she was certainly corresponding with a lady in Susan Wood, which is a little enclave in Chislehurst very near the railway station. And they were swapping stories about dreams that they'd had. And there are more stories written by Richmal about mysticism and the occult. And I think probably fueled by this friendship that she had with a local lady called Elizabeth. She wrote many letters to the Religious Tract Society, and within the letters she would scribble notes in the margin. So perhaps she was quite self-critical, or perhaps she was struggling with her memory and had gone back over a letter and wanted to add more things to make sure that people definitely had her imprint on things. She was a fellow of the Church Fellowship of the Psychic Society and the Church Army. And then she wrote several letters, which I can fully understand, for the newsletter of the Central Council for the Care of Cripples, and excuse my words there, in 1957. You wouldn't, I forget what they're called now, it's probably Scope, but you certainly wouldn't use that terminology anymore. There are certainly lots of evidence from her family about how she's coping with her leg. She had a number of operations, and how she's coping with that disability. So there I was in the archives, actually beside her desk, which was a particular joy. So you'll see photographs of that as well. But life carries on at Beechworth. She was a member of that peculiar society, the Men of Kent and Kentish Men, paying her annual subscription of £2.30. She wrote to the local estate agent and council complaining about a planning application that was going to be encroaching on her garden. So very much like many other local residents, let me assure you. She was an active member of the Conservative Party, and she gave her help to the MP at the time, Pat Hornsby-Smith, helping with electioneering. She was a member of the Petswood National Trust. She paid a £1 annual fee. And I'm not at all surprised, because the National Trust land, Hawkwood and Petswood Estate, is directly opposite her house. She also paid a subscription to Chislehurst Commons, good for her, and she donated £5, which would have been a reasonable sum, to Graham Cheeseman House, which was a home for destitute young boys at the time, here in Chislehurst and quite close to where she lived. She was also a member of the Red Cross Chislehurst division. But within her diaries, and with an author, one's always looking at their involvement in their own diaries, but actually it was just a sort of activities, not her own thoughts, but what she was doing on a day-to-day basis. But I'm delighted to know that she went regularly to the Bull's Head and the Tiger's Head for meals. So she obviously didn't have lots of cooking at home. She went out for her meals. I wonder how many of her fans stopped her and asked for her autograph at the time. And then what I'm really surprised about is that she used to get taxis, but she got them to Bickley Station. obviously going off to engagements in London. But you think about Bixley Station, there's no lift. There's about 40 steps up and down to the platform. How on earth she did that with a gammy leg, I have no idea, but good on her. She took the Sunday Times. I found her bill to the local newsagent. She paid a gardener and a nurseryman from Coolings, so she helped local people. And she had a daily help and visiting hairdresser who came from Whitehorse Hill. Then I was delighted to find that she used the opticians, RF Banks in Pettswood, and those iconic glasses of hers. I found a photograph in the archives of her glasses case, and the optician's name within it. I can't end the story, obviously, without coming to her final days. She died in 1969, and when she died, there were still books half written on her desk. One book was published posthumously, but I think there's one book that was never finished. She had a glorious, well-attended funeral at St Nicholas Church, and she's actually cremated and her ashes scattered at Eltham Crematorium. So there's no firm memorial grave for anybody particularly to visit. I looked at her will, and I was delighted to note that she left a substantial amount of money to her brother's fund, the Lambourne Trust, which was dealing with young injured children, and she left another sum to a leper colony in Tanzania. But what about that scatty old plaque at Beechworth? Well, I'm pleased to say that we really did tart it up. So we had the sign improved, and we have a Chislehurst Society plaque on the gateway of the house. So do go and have a look and see for yourself. But what a party we had at the unveiling. The Richmal Crompton pub in Bromley, Wetherspoons, they paid for all the Prosecco at the party. The Mayor of Bromley came to unveil the plaque, and Edward Ashby and Kate Massey, who are her Richmal's great nephew and great niece, came along to actually tell us their stories of their relative and to enjoy the unveiling together. It was a splendid occasion. It's not an easy house to find, but head towards Leeson's Corner, and it's just tucked in behind the trees. But you could perhaps do yourself a treasure trail and end up at the Richmal Crompton in Bromley as well. But thanks to them, we had a great afternoon. There's a new biography coming out about Richmal next year, which will be to celebrate 100 years since the first publication of the stories in the Happy Mag. So that's quite something to look forward to. And we will advertise that on the Chislehurst Society website. So happy to let people know when that is published. In Bromley, there's also some playing fields off Southborough Lane, which are named the Richmal Crompton playing fields. I didn't know that, but somebody let me know after a talk that I'd done. And I must say I do enjoy giving these talks because you always get feedback from the audience. And at the one I did last year, just before lockdown, a lady came and told me that she had nursed Richmal Crompton when she died. I get fed up because on Wikipedia it says that Richmal Crompton died in Farnborough. Well, she died at Farnborough Hospital, what we know now as the Prue. She had a heart attack, I'm afraid. But this lady said that Richmal had come into the hospital clearly very, very unwell, and had come with suitcases with her. Suitcase of clothes, obviously, but also a suitcase of money, stashed notes, which stayed under her bed. And I suppose 1960s, a lady who'd made her money during the 40s and 50s, she clearly did have a bank account, but it's the same as everybody keeping their money under their mattress, and that's what Richmal did as well. Anyway, thank you for listening to me. I so enjoy giving these talks to people, and if you have questions, we'll be able to answer those as well. So we've had a few questions popped up on the screen, which is great. Thank you very much. The first one is, this is an interesting one. Do you think her name will live on into the 21st century? I asked my own children, now in their 30s, if they knew who Richmal Crompton was, and they had no idea at all. Clearly my fault, I hadn't read the stories to them as they were little. My brothers know of the stories. I think it will come down to whether grandparents who loved Just William will carry on reading those stories to their grandchildren. She's very non-PC, really. I mean, it's no longer appropriate for little boys to chase after little girls with worms on sticks and for little girls to scream and scream and scream until they're sick. So the Violet Elizabeth Bott of the future isn't somebody that you probably want to be encouraging your granddaughter to be like. So I'm not convinced. That there's a very healthy Just William Appreciation Society, and they do all they can to keep the books and her works alive. It's interesting, I did meet somebody, a resident of Chislehurst, who had been for tea and had met Richmal Crompton, and Crompton herself said that she thought that Violet Elizabeth was a little bit of outmoded. There's an old-fashioned word. But I'm unless we all keep her alive, I'm not convinced that the name Richmal Crompton will be on the must-read lists of our children in the next generation. So I think we just have a job to do to keep her legacy alive. But I'm really pleased that she's a strong female role model when one's looking for archetypal women to talk about. When we're talking literature in school, she's a good role model to discuss with students. A second question we had was, is there a blue badge on her house in Cherry Tree Road? I don't think there is. There's certainly, as I said, the Bromley plaque on the main house where she lived for the longest period of her life. And I don't know if there's anything on her birthplace in Bury in Lancashire, or in fact, even if that house is still there. English Heritage, who run the blue plaque scheme, only give one blue plaque to an individual. So there can only be one English Heritage plaque to Richmal Crompton, and it would likely be in Bury in Lancashire. Chislehurst Society is happy to provide location signage, but of course she only lived in one house in Chislehurst. So to get one on Cherry Tree Road, you'd have to approach Bromley Council, or maybe the owners themselves of that house would be happy to put up a plate in her memory. But it'd be good to be able to go from Cherry Orchard Road to the Glebe, to Beechworth, and follow her story. And as I said, end up at the pub in Bromley if you want to. Another kind question we've received is to do with me rather than to do with Richmal, but asking me how I got into local history, which is, to me, it's my passion. So it was probably an inevitable journey, but I did history as a degree at Sheffield and worked for many years with the Prospects Career Service, advising young people about their future careers. But I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis back in 2000, and for a while it didn't cause me any problem, but over a period of time I became more fatigued and found that I really couldn't carry on going all around the country doing all the contracts that I was working on. So in 2009 I retired on health grounds. Spent a while at home thinking, clearing out cupboards and wondering what I was going to do. And I lived at that time in Lubbock Road, and I wondered what this name was, Lubbock. And so I got into researching the history of the great man, Sir John Lubbock. He's the guy that gave us bank holidays, so we should be really grateful to him. And in the course of my research, I started to meet other neighbours and have coffee and glasses of wine with them, and I ended up writing the story of the whole road. My book is available on the Chislehurst Society website if you're interested. But researching family history, house history is completely consuming. And in the course of finding old photographs, I got talking with the Chislehurst Society, who happened to have a vacancy on their board of trustees. So I was invited along to a meeting. That was 12 years ago. I became a volunteer at the vice chair, and now I'm the chairman. And most days I absolutely love it. 1 or 2 days can be a living nightmare, but generally speaking, it's something I'm passionate about. You meet so many interesting people. So to all of you, I would say, learn about the house you live in, find out about the people who live there. You never know what stories you're going to uncover, and I'd be delighted to help anybody who wants to find out more. So thank you for listening.